If you're a sports fan who hasn't heard of fantasy football or doesn't know a lot about it, then what I'm about to say could have a positive impact on your experience enjoying sports. When I was 11 years old, my dad invited me to join his fantasy football league, and it was one of the best things that's ever happened to me because I found a hobby that's lasted me 7+ years. And even if you don't like football, but you're still a sports fan, maybe you like hockey, baseball, or basketball, maybe those are your sports, then guess what? You can still play fantasy football, and it's just as fun. And no matter what sport you're watching, it's nice to have your own personalized team that you can root for. So there's 3 clear benefits of playing fantasy football. There's social interactions with a group of friends, family, or coworkers. There's personal attachments to the NFL games that you're watching, and you develop strategy. The first benefit of playing fantasy football is the social interactions with people in your league. I'm going to refer back to the story I mentioned earlier about my dad. He got me into playing fantasy football when I was around 11 years old, and ever since then, it's been something we could always talk about. He was always teaching me at a very young age, and then as time went on, I became more knowledgeable and was even able to teach him in some instances. And now we can have very good discussions about fantasy that benefit both of us. But recently, he stopped watching football this year, so that took an effect on me and my enjoyment from watching and playing fantasy football, because a lot of it is just the interactions you have with the people in your league. And for me, that was my dad, because he was always teaching me from a very young age. So when he stopped, it definitely took an effect on me. But regardless, he could still return and our relationship could continue. And you could have a similar relationship with anyone in your league who, if they really enjoy fantasy football, you could have that relationship with them, and you could be going to Buffalo Wild Wings and watching all the games and just having the best time ever. Fantasy football can help you establish a personal attachment to many NFL games. Ever since the Rams left, I've had no NFL team to root for, and many of you might be in the same boat. And if you're not satisfied just being a typical frontrunner, then fantasy football could help you fill the void. You get to draft whatever players you like and watch them play on game day. And then whatever they do, it impacts you. So if you draft DeAndre Hopkins and you're watching the Cardinals game, but you don't care about the Cardinals or whoever they're playing, it still matters to you because you have DeAndre Hopkins, and whatever he does is going to benefit you. So it makes it more enjoyable watching the NFL games. And you can get to a point where if you have a player, say like a running back, like for example, I had Ezekiel Elliott on the Cowboys, and whenever the Cowboys would do good, Zeke would do good, because then they have the ball and then they're running the ball when they're ahead instead of passing the ball when they're behind. So you can find yourself rooting for actual NFL teams while watching your fantasy teams, and it can make it a lot more enjoyable. Fantasy football involves a lot of strategy. So you should have a strategy going into the draft, even if it's just a rough sketch. Maybe that's just a list of players that you would draft at certain points in the draft, or maybe you want to draft certain positions at certain rounds in the draft. And that is a very common strategy. And according to Fantasy Football Counselor, the number 1 rule of fantasy drafts is to draft running backs early. And that's because they're hard to pick up later in the draft. And that is very true. It's a rule I follow, but none of these rules are set in stone. So for example, if all the good running backs are taken, instead of taking a running back that's not as valuable, like for a first-round draft pick, it might be best to take one of the best receivers and then pick up the running backs later in the draft. But you can only do that if you have planned your draft and you know that there are running backs later in the draft that you can pick up to make up for the ground. So this is how having a strategy can help prepare you for real-time decisions to help build your team. I've touched on many reasons why, if you're a sports fan, you should join a fantasy football league. Between the social interactions with the people in your group, developing an attachment to the NFL games, and developing strategy, fantasy football can improve your experience watching sports. It has for me, and I hope it could for you too.